When in doubt, ask yourself this question. Is this the sort of watch that is going to remain in Rolex's catalog for the next, say, 10 years? Not a chance. Now this VTNR, it's the antithesis of playing it safe. It's the Picasso painting of the GMT world, you know? And I think the long and short of this video, if I was in the market for a GMT and I had the funds to spend, I wouldn't be hesitating on this oddity. And I'll get into the reasons in this video, but chiefly because you and I both know that this sort of watch, it's not going to be around for long. The year is 2022 and Rolex delivers two of the most peculiar and interesting sports models in recent times, with a focus on pilot-inspired pieces and travel. The Air King with that odd crown guard system, some great improvements. If you ask me, a watch with great value for money, considering that you're getting a top-tier sports watch, the best clasp, now with the professional case. And the fact that it's a piece that hardly anyone is chasing, all the better reason to go after it. And partnering with this Air King, of course, the Destro GMT, the VTNR. Now back then when it was launched, it was both heralded as one of the most collectible sports Rolex models ever, while many others were left perturbed by its sheer strangeness. The crown guards pointing in the other direction, and the weirdest thing of all, the date window at the 9 o'clock position. Now years later, that hasn't changed, I believe. And what's funny is that it's a watch that I think has been swept aside by a lot of us enthusiasts. It's sort of forgotten. But the truth is, referring to the context of this video, I reckon most of us probably assume that this watch has already left the catalog, or it's very near to leaving. I mean, the drop-off in interest in the VTNR over the last few years, it has to be one of the most severe declines that we have ever seen in the modern Rolex era. And considering that this is a GMT watch, this is one of their most prized models. When you look at the charts, the percentages, and just the sheer drop-off over the last 24 months in interest, I guess in this case, numbers don't lie. And like so many of the watches belonging to prominent brands that are relegated to the back catalogue, it's fallen into that category of watches that you need to be consciously reminded of, and you go, oh yes, that one exists, right. The weird thing is, it's a watch that was designed for people like me, people who wear watches on their right wrists. And let's just be clear that left-handers, we are very weird people. I mean, 3 decades later, I still struggle locking and unlocking turnkey doors. At a young age, I could write every letter of every word backwards, full sentences. So yes, I am the sort of guy who is used to seeing things back to front. But even years later, the design of this Destro GMT, I still cannot figure it out. There is something important about how we collectively can appreciate symmetry, where there is a correct balance across a dial, even when it is asymmetrical, like when we see the date at the 3 position. But many of us feel and agree that there is no real harmony to this dial because it is completely reversed, and it appears almost disconnected. I truly think it's because of the date window being placed at the 9 o'clock position. It's the one element that throws the entire look of this watch off. Even as a lefty who wears watches backwards, I would have preferred to have seen the date window at the 3. And look how great it could have been. Something that we can associate with far easier. So for many of us, the reason why we have turned away from this watch and not really paid the VTNR any more notice is because the design is kind of off-putting. It's unsettling. And the more I think about it, it lacks a centering point that we can quickly pick up and understand. It doesn't really matter how this watch is displayed, any kind of angle. It feels like a truly bizarre mirror image of itself. Of course, this was done deliberately. This was an internal project greenlit by Rolex's CEO, Mr. Dufour. And I think more than anything, he wanted to bring out a GMT that shook up the playing field, that was able to separate itself almost entirely from the range. And fair to say, it does do that, maybe too well. So putting the watch's oddness aside, the Destro case is a fascinating one. And the reason why I wanted to make this video is that historically, any left-hander watch is always collectible. Who started this trend? Well, Panerai. They pretty much kicked it off. Definitely because of their case sizes, because a watch like the Luminor with its huge crown protection system would dig into the operator's wrist. We can see how well it works with a watch like this because everything on the dial is symmetrical, it's easy to understand, and for a functional purpose, it's actually very beneficial to have the crown on the other side. Then we look deeper into it, to a brand like Sinn and the Einsatzzeitmesser, the EZM1. Functional and practical purpose, having the crowns and pushers out of the way so that the user can operate them without any sort of hang-ups. And it is in a lot of ways less restrictive. It adds to the watch's overall design. It looks very clean, it looks neat, it looks purposeful. What about a behemoth like the Omega Ploprof? Some of the earliest prototypes were arranged in this configuration and they worked extremely well. It adds to the overall look and feel of this professional-oriented watch. And the story goes that this Destro GMT was inspired by the Albino 6542, the Pan Am variant, that I think also had a left-hand configuration. But if we look further ahead in Rolex's time, there are a few examples of mil-spec Submariners that had a left-hand configuration. Now, why did I cover these pieces? What do they all have in common? Well, it doesn't matter who you are as an enthusiast or a collector, these are all highly sought after and collectible in their own circles. Whether it's a Destro Panerai, Zin, Omega, or a Rolex, these models, they have a reputation. So let's get down to brass tacks. Rolex's GMT hierarchy, where does it stand at the moment? Of course, the Pepsi bezel, the BLRO, is in the top spot, followed very closely by the BLNR. These two watches, years later, are still the most sought after models in Rolex's catalogue. Following closely behind them, models like the CHNR, the Root Beer, and this grey ghost bezel variant that's pretty new to the catalogue. These pieces are both fighting for that near to top tier rating. What's so peculiar is that the VTNR has really been pushed out of the spotlight almost completely. It feels like such an isolated watch all alone. Now, for those who know what they're looking at and looking for, they might pursue this watch with a lot of anticipation. I would say the collectors who have experienced virtually all the Rolex models are now chasing after this watch for its novelty. But you'll see when you look to grey market prices, you compare them to where they were and where they are now. Compared to the BLRO and the BLNR, it's not a watch that really has high premiums assigned to it. I guess it all depends on where you are based in the world, but compared to these other mainline models, it's not selling for double retail. More like just a few grand over. And considering the watch, the colorway, the types of bracelets it comes with, as well as the rarity, which we're going to talk about now, it seems like a good watch to look at a bit more closely. Now, like I said in the introduction of this video, 10 years from now, is this watch still going to be in Rolex's catalog? Highly unlikely. I think if anything, they're going to turn the case around and give us a right-hand option. The same bezel is going to be used, the watch is going to be rotated, and it's going to look like your standard right-hander GMT. That, if anything, is where I think the VTNR is going to go in the next few years. I'm going to stick my neck out and say that this watch is not going to be in Rolex's catalog for the next 10 years, maybe the next 5 years tops. A 5-year lifespan before being discontinued. Why does that matter? Well, of course, it means that the production numbers for this kind of watch is going to be low. But I want you to think about what this watch could represent in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years. Look at the Hulk Submariner as a point of reference. A watch that had a lot of popularity when it was around, for sure, but it wasn't anywhere near as sought after as other variants until it was discontinued. Even to this day, it's a watch that a large percentage still chase and still want to own. Now, why is that? Well, to the Submariner's advantage, it is an anniversary edition, and it has one of the most beautiful green dials that Rolex has ever made. It's also not polarizing at all. Its design is very safe. Now, this watch is the complete opposite of safe. It is a Picasso painting. That's a comparison. So referring to the Hulk Submariner, a watch in green, produced for near to 10 years. But in the case of the VTNR, it's because of its obscurity that makes it better. The fact that it's probably going to have a shorter life cycle, and the fact that it's a more complicated watch, it offers you more for the money. So I'll leave you by asking this question, that in a world that is so inundated with homogeneous watch designs that play off one another, that are very much inspired by the next one. Originality, breaking boundaries, pushing the envelope, it's so scarce, especially in this sort of tier when we look at the sports watch. Should we just appreciate the designs we know, the ones that we are accustomed to seeing, because they deserve to be there, because they have a reputation of having a date at the 3 o'clock position? You know, they're acceptable, they're not polarizing, dare say they're easier on the eyes. Or should we learn to appreciate these sorts of oddities like the VTNR? The ones that are so different that they do give us a headache, that we cannot years later even understand fully. It is a watch that to this day I am still so interested in. Not that I want to own one necessarily, even being a right-hand watch wearer, I prefer my crowns the other way around. But it's the prototype feel that this watch exhibits, the test platform, something that maybe didn't get everything right, that we cannot agree on, makes for a far more interesting conversation than a watch that we can all, unanimously say is good. So what is the point of this video? I have this feeling deep down, that gut feeling you get, that the VTNR is not going to be around for very long. 5 years maximum. Just judging by its general reception, I think it's a watch that's going to return to a safer format in the next few years. But as far as a future collectible, this is the one I'd be banking on, for all the reasons why people aren't looking at it. Because it's an oddity. Because it's a Picasso painting. That is the reason why you should chase a watch like this. Not thinking about the overall flip in the next 2 or 3 years, but in the next 10 years. Where's this watch going to be? So what are your thoughts on the VTNR? I know it's a piece that most people can't stand, but that's what makes it all the more fun to discuss. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next one.